Hi, so our guest today for the Horn Notes video podcast is Dr. Gustavo Camacho. Welcome.
Thank you, John. It's great to be back.
Okay. Well, so back in the sense that he actually got his doctorate here at ASU, but currently Dr. Camacho is the horn professor at Western Washington University, having previously taught for 4 years at the Interlochen Arts Academy, and got his master's and his doctorate here at Arizona State. So the topic of the day, though, one of the special things he's done is during the time he was teaching at Interlochen, he developed a system for teaching intonation to students, because that was one of the things he noticed. They had very motivated, talented students coming in, but that was like a factor in what was sort of a negative in their playing. So turning to him, I mean, is that essentially how you got kind of started with working? I mean, you were working on intonation before then, I'm sure, too.
Yes. Well, first of all, even after 7 years, it's hard to call you John. John.
Or you even managed to do it when we taught at Interlochen.
It's true, but this was under your own threat. You must call me John. But Dr. Erickson, John, I started working on this method basically on myself to try to improve myself while I was here studying with you. And this was basically a result of major anxiety on my part, sitting either principal or third horn in the school orchestra and always feeling like there was something off with the intonation, with the note that I was playing, and just not having enough time to figure out what exactly was going on. And through your teaching, John, and also Sample Afin, who was teaching coaching our brass quintet, I got introduced to drones, and I'm not talking about the drones that fly over your head.
Yeah, I saw somebody commented on Facebook. I said you're having you here, and they were like, "Oh, really? How did drones help intonation?" But we mean the pitches.
Yes. The other one maybe has some relevancy in some way. I'm sure you could find a relevancy, John.
No, I don't think I could, actually.
And the drones we started working on in lessons, sometimes just a drone that John would play while I played something, or sometimes John would play an interval, always an interval, like a perfect fifth, off from something that I was playing. For example, the beautiful sounds from the Brass Gem book. And that got me thinking, well, this is helping so much in lessons that happen once a week. What if I started implementing drones in my daily practice in some way? And that way, when I got to the ensemble, I'm not just working on intonation using my ears while I'm in the ensemble or my weekly lesson, but also every day in the practice room. And that way, I'm actually practicing the same way that I'm going to play within the ensemble. It helped me tremendously. It was almost enlightening, I would almost call it that, for my intonation and my anxiety. All of a sudden, after several years of working with drones in my practice room, I could be in the ensemble, with either a large ensemble within a horn section or in a smaller chamber ensemble, brass quintet, wooden quintet, and feel really comfortable with recognizing the sounds around me and fitting my notes so that they sound good.
Okay, well, sounding good is important. So take us back to, you were teaching at Interlochen for 4 years, and you had, these real motivated students that wanted to audition for big schools. And so you're working on intonation with them. You developed a system.
I had fantastic students that came to my door at Interlochen. Many of them are in schools like Juilliard or New England Conservatory, Cincinnati, Northwestern, Juilliard. Did I mention that one? And
Northwestern. Anyway, but good schools.
And they were fantastic. And I think the reasons why they're in those schools is because they already came sounding phenomenal to my door. They sounded fantastic in their technique. But even though many of them had great ears, sometimes perfect pitch, they still had issues playing in tune, either within a horn section, in large ensemble, or in a chamber ensemble, or sometimes just with piano when they were playing a solo with piano accompaniment. So I started thinking, well, why is this? They're good at ear training. They can match pitch, singing-wise. But when they start playing the horn, they're not able to figure out what to do to play in tune. So I started thinking about how I could present my ideas about being flexible with pitch to my students at Interlochen in a really organized way so that they could go through several steps, and by the time it got to step number 4, they would feel comfortable with their intonation. So it's a 4-step program, almost like a diet.
Yeah. So we'll lose 100 pounds or what? No. But we'll improve intonation. No, and just as an aside, I mean, hearing him talk about this too, I think about, one of the things about effective teaching is problem solving. So you saw this problem and you worked out a way to solve it. So that's like an effective thing. And the students at the same time are looking to solve problems, and it kind of works hand in hand.
I should mention also that one of the reasons why I came up with these solutions to these problems was also because I continued to teach even during my graduate studies. And in teaching, it helped me to look at things in a way that makes sense, not just to the student, but also for myself. So sometimes I would say something, come up with something, and say, hey, that sounds pretty good. I should probably do that too.
Yeah.
And so let me tell you about these 4 steps. In step number 1 is a free-for-all, essentially, for the horn player, and really for any wind instrument player. And that free-for-all means that they have the freedom to explore intonation as much as they want. Meaning, they should figure out on their instrument, regardless of what their instrument is, how they can bend the pitch or manipulate the pitch. For horn players, there are essentially 3 ways. 1, you can't adjust in real time, and that's your slides, of course. 2, you can use your right hand, cover the bell a little bit at a time with your right hand, and the pitch goes flat, 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 or open it up your right hand and the pitch goes sharp, sharp, sharp. And the 3rd way is, I call it chops. John, you call it.
Yeah. So we were talking about this before the podcast, and it's actually an interesting question. I actually asked Peter Iltis when I did the MRI horn interview with him a few episodes back, how do you do a pitch bend? And he hadn't really studied it, but I believe a lot of it has to do with oral cavity shapes. Even though our perception is it's our lips. And I used to tell people to think of it as your lips, but now I kind of think of it as more related to the tongue. But in any event, you don't want to over-conceptualize it. You can definitely bend a pitch and just leave it at that. But what's the mechanism is kind of a good question. But I think I like the idea of thinking it without, again, over-conceptualizing as oral cavity, because you can make very subtle motions with your tongue, which would impact intonation pretty automatically, and you're not even thinking about it.
I call it the oatmeal raisin cookie method, is for me. When I bend the pitch, I feel like I'm chewing something chewy, like that oatmeal raisin cookie.
So, like shawarma? Okay, so there's an exercise in the brass gym called shawarma, which is another good introductory exercise to this part 1/part 2 of your method.
I actually finally ate a shawarma for the first time, a Bavarian sandwich, and I have to say it was as chewy as anticipated.
Advertised.
Yeah, as advertised, exactly. So basically this first step is the opportunity for the musician to explore the terrain of that particular note. Not just play in tune, but explore all of the possible out-of-tuneness for that particular note. How much can you manipulate the pitch using those 2 methods, chops or right hand, without skipping to the next partial, up or down? That's step number 1.
Okay.
Most people don't need to do step number 1, but if it's new to you, start with step number 1. When you've mastered step number 1, they're almost like Jedi Academies. You graduate from Jedi Academy 1 and you move on to Jedi Academy 2. But you can't go on to Jedi Academy 2 until you get that certificate from Yoda. That says you can move on.
Or from Horn Matters. No, but going on. Step 2 is explore.
Step 2 is finally turning on the drone And now it's not just about exploring how it feels to move up and down with the intonation on a particular note, but now it's also exploring what it sounds like to be out of tune. Because one of the things that I found from a lot of students is that they had anxiety about playing in tune. And that anxiety kept them from really moving either one direction or the other, up or down, to figure out which way they were out of tune. Were they flat or were they sharp? All they were trying to do was kind of hone in and try to play it in tune. And a lot of times that wasn't really all that successful. So step number 2 is getting rid of that anxiety of the necessity to play in tune, and instead move against that drone and start familiarizing yourself with what it sounds like to be slightly sharp, more sharp, super, super, super duper sharp, or slightly flat, more flat, or super, super, super duper flat. And that leads us to step number 3. Step number 3 is target practice. Now, finally, once you feel comfortable moving through that intonation zone, now you can, along with the drone, hone in on whatever, either whether it's a unison or an interval, whatever pitch you decide to turn on the drone, and start trying to match either that unison or that perfect interval or major minor interval.
Right. Now, I gave a presentation about this just a little bit ago to the ASU Horn Studio, and he does. One thing is that it's always sort of worried me in teaching this anyway. As you look at charts and you can see like this note is 14 cents, blah blah blah, and you sort of zone out because it's too much information. So basically, though, you're looking at a major third against a drone needs to be flat-ish feeling, but the fifth needs to be a little bit sharp to feel exactly in tune, and the minor key, the third needs to be sharpish or rather sharp, but you can tell where it's right when it sounds right.
Right. And I like to talk to students in vague terms. Yes, it's good to know the chart for just intonation and how many cents something needs to be raised or lowered. But for me, the words a little, some, and a lot, those are much more powerful words to live by because they give me flexibility to move around rather than having a strict guideline of where a particular note needs to be. So for example, if I'm playing a G natural of a chord that is an E flat G B flat chord, that G needs to be lowered a lot. That's what I'm thinking in my mind.
Right. But
if I'm playing an A natural of an F major triad, FAC, because if I'm fingering it 1 and 2, because that A natural 1 and 2 fingering is already pretty sharp, I'm thinking the words, I need to lower this note a lot, unless I use, of course, my alternate fingering. And in that case, I probably only need to lower it a little.
Yeah, and that brings us to part 4 of your 4-part program, which is...
Send me your credit card information and...
No, that's not it, I don't think.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's step number 5. Okay, I forgot. Step number 4 is to find friends and play chamber music. So why is chamber music a perfect way to work on intonation? There's several reasons. Probably the most important reason is that you're playing your own part. And there are very few people in the ensemble, so your ears can more easily pinpoint what is going on with the music. And the second really good reason why chamber music works great for practicing playing in tune with the sounds around you is because you're rehearsing on your own typically, and you have the opportunity to stop and work on certain chords that don't quite sound right. Sometimes when we're rehearsing with a large ensemble, that chord just keeps going. You know it was out of tune. You just don't have an opportunity to go back and work on it.
Yeah. So that's the outline there. Now, one of the questions we were talking about in relation to all this too, though, is like, so let's say you play all of your melodies against drones. Is that a good idea?
using a drone is actually really helpful for harmonic intonation. But when we're talking about melodic intonation, equal temperament is the preferred method in my mind, and also yours, right, John?
Yeah, pretty much. And we had an example we were talking earlier. We were saying Shostakovich 5. I mean, it's hard to like define what's the function of each note in a chord. I mean, you probably could, but basically it just needs to sound good, which is pretty close to equal temperament in reality, right?
Right. On the other hand, what if you have something like the excerpt from Der Freischütz, the overture to Der Freischütz, and the fourth horn player starts on that B natural, which is the third of that major triad. Correct, John?
Maybe, but see, so you got to define your situation, though. So let's say it's for an audition and it's just you playing by yourself. I think it's just got to sound good. I think if you try to adjust things too much, it might sound not good by yourself. But if it's in the finals and they set up a section, and you need to play with the section, you need to be sounding good, which includes adjusting to the intonation around you instead of being in your own little world.
And this probably brings up your next podcast, is how different do you have to play in an audition versus when you're actually playing within the ensemble?
Yeah, there's a topic right there. We're talking earlier. We got a lot of good topics, actually. I hope to talk to Gus again here. Before we run out of time, any quick final thoughts on drone and tuning and things you feel useful to mention?
Well, I have one thought. If you've kind of fast forward through this podcast to the end because you want to know, well, what is actually the last thing that is going to happen in this podcast? Well, I would leave you with one word, and that word is flexibility. Intonation is having the flexibility to adjust to the sounds around you in real time. Every note that you play needs to be adjusted, and even if the adjustment is no adjustment, that I still consider to be an adjustment.
Yeah, those are the words to live by. I've heard good players. One person I know won a big job. Somebody described him as having a quick right hand. And that is correct. they do sound good. Well, thank Gus for joining us here. Hope to have you back again sometime. You got some other good ideas that we were just chatting about. So thank you again for listening to this edition of the Horn Notes Video Podcast, and just be tuning back for more episodes.